Most people would say that a fighter who destroyed Fedor Emelianenko would go down as an all-time great, and usually they would be right. Beating Fedor back in the day was like unlocking God mode in MMA, instant legacy status. But Antonio Bigfoot Silva's story did not go that way. Not even close. He went from shocking the world to getting absolutely obliterated in one of the most tragic declines we have ever seen in combat sports. In 2011, Silva did the unthinkable. He ragdolled Fedor, stopped him, and put an exclamation mark on a near-decade-long reign of terror that the Russian legend had over the sport. For a brief moment, he was the scariest heavyweight on the planet. But then, everything fell apart. 10 brutal knockouts, a medical condition that might have been both a blessing and a curse, and a career that should have ended years before it actually did. Was it the insane wars, the banned medication, or was Bigfoot's own genetics responsible for the rise and fall of one of MMA's biggest heavyweights? Today we're taking a deep dive into Bigfoot Silva's shocking career collapse, from his unstoppable peak to his troubling downfall. We are breaking down how one of MMA's most physically unique fighters went from a world beater to a walking knockout reel. Born in Campina Grande, Brazil in 1979, Antonio Silva was just built different. Literally. Silva has acromegaly, a rare condition caused by an overactive pituitary gland pumping out too much growth hormone. This leads to excessive bone growth, a thick skull, giant hands, and a jaw that looks like it was carved out of stone. Most fighters are born tough. Bigfoot was born with a body that seemed engineered for destruction. His massive bone structure, unnatural strength, and sheer durability were not just advantages, they were weapons. He could take damage most fighters wouldn't survive and dish out power that did not seem human. Now, acromegaly isn't just about being huge. It wrecks your body over time. You experience vision problems because the skull keeps growing and pressing on the optic nerves. There is joint pain because the bones grow abnormally. You can also have heart issues because an enlarged body puts extra strain on the cardiovascular system. But probably the worst part for someone like Bigfoot was that head trauma hits different when you already have an enlarged skull. Bigfoot needed surgery to remove the tumor that was causing his acromegaly, but it didn't stop the condition completely. And that is where things get complicated. Early on, though none of this seemed like a problem, if anything, his condition made him a nightmare in the cage. He was a 6'4", 265-pound super heavyweight who could eat shots and keep moving forward. Opponents didn't just have to fight a man, they had to fight a biological anomaly that was built like a tank. But over time, his body started breaking down faster than normal fighters. And when the knockouts started piling up, it wasn't just normal CTE concerns. It was a medical nightmare waiting to happen. Yet in the beginning, nobody was thinking about the long-term effects. All they saw was an unstoppable force, a fighter who seemed too big, too strong, and too damn tough for his own good. Bigfoot started his career in Brazilian promotions in the early 2000s, back when MMA wasn't exactly a safe sport in that region. The fights were wild, barely regulated, and full of monsters trying to kill each other. Right out the gate, Silva was destroying people. He went 6-1, smashing guys like a human wrecking ball, using his massive frame to overpower and ragdoll anyone who dared step in front of him. In 2005, Silva got signed by Heroes, a Japanese promotion under K1. This was Pride's golden era where heavyweights were basically superhumans, pumped full of who knows what, fighting like gladiators. And Bigfoot, he fit right in. He was bigger than most guys, and he wasn't just strong, he was fast for his size. His striking was still raw, but once he got a hold of you, good luck surviving. His time in Japan was short, but it got him noticed. And in 2007, he signed with Elite XC, an American promotion that was throwing money at big-name heavyweights. And this was where Silva's career really took off. Elite XC put him up against Rico Rodriguez, Justin Eilers, and James Thompson, all legit names in the heavyweight scene back then. And Bigfoot wrecked them. In 2008, he became the Elite XC heavyweight champion, officially stamping his name on the map. The UFC still wasn't calling, but another promotion was about to change his life: Strikeforce. If you weren't watching MMA back in the 2000s, it is hard to explain just how unbeatable Fedor Emelianenko seemed. The dude was a mythical figure. He had gone 10 years without losing, taking out legends like Mirko Cro Cop, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, and Mark Coleman. He had aura, mystique, and a style that made him feel invincible. When Strikeforce set up the Heavyweight Grand Prix in 2011, Fedor vs. Bigfoot was just supposed to be another step in Fedor's legacy. Instead, Silva ended it brutally. Round 1, Fedor started fast, throwing bombs. Silva took a few huge shots but didn't go down. Round 2 was where Silva turned the tide, took Fedor down, and smashed his face into the canvas with ground and pound. The finish came when Fedor's right eye was completely swollen shut and the doctor called it off. Fedor was done. The MMA world was shocked, and just like that, Bigfoot Silva had arrived.
Dude, when he got on top of Fedor, when he mounted Fedor, I was like, holy fuck.
That picture of just a giant on top of this kind of fat Russian and just fucking...
Dude, he was a building. He was like a building planted on his chest. Like, you're not shaking that off.
DC.
He's 300 pounds.
Remember when DC fought him? And I go, dude, you fucked him up. He goes, how can you miss? How can you miss? He goes, that's the easiest fight in the world. How do you miss? I threw a 1-2. They both landed.
After the Fedor fight, Bigfoot Silva wasn't just a rising contender. He was one of the scariest heavyweights in the world. He had just obliterated the so-called GOAT with brutal ground and pound, and the hype was through the roof. And then, just like that, Strikeforce collapsed. By 2011, the UFC was swallowing up every other promotion like an MMA Thanos. And when they bought out Strikeforce, they got Bigfoot in the deal. This was his shot. Fans were pumped. Here was a massive, hulking 265-pound wrecking machine stepping into the UFC's heavyweight division at a time when heavyweights were absolute savages. We're talking prime Cain Velasquez, prime Junior Dos Santos, prime Alistair Overeem. The division was a shark tank, but Bigfoot was ready to prove that he belonged. And then, his UFC debut was a nightmare. Let's set the stage. UFC 146, Bigfoot Silva versus Cain Velasquez, the former UFC champ who was out for blood after losing his title to Junior Dos Santos. Bigfoot was huge. Cain was smaller but built like a tank, with wrestling and cardio for days. And from the opening bell, it was a bloodbath. Cain took 0 chances. He shot for a double leg takedown immediately. Bigfoot went down hard and had no answer for Cain's relentless ground and pound. One vicious elbow from Velasquez opened up a gash on Bigfoot's forehead that turned the octagon into a horror movie. Blood poured into Bigfoot's eyes, blinding him completely. The ref let it go way longer than he should have, and Cain just hammered down shots until the fight was finally stopped. So, for his first fight in the UFC, Bigfoot got turned into a crime scene. After that nightmare debut, people were already writing Bigfoot off. But then, in his next fight, Bigfoot shut everyone up. UFC 156, Bigfoot Silva versus Alistair Overeem. Now back then, Overeem was a monster. He had just come off a brutal demolition of Brock Lesnar, and people were already crowning him as the next champ. The fight was basically booked as a stepping stone for Overeem, except Bigfoot didn't get the memo. For 2 rounds, Overeem clowned him, hands down, talking trash, smirking. Then in the 3rd round, Bigfoot launched a nuke. One huge right hand. Boom! Overeem's legs shut off. Bigfoot smelled blood. He rushed in, unloaded a 10-piece combo, and Overeem collapsed against the cage. Bigfoot stood over his lifeless body and screamed like a gladiator. MMA fans lost their minds. It was one of the most satisfying knockouts of the year, and just like that, Bigfoot was back in the title picture. 2 fights, 1 massacre, 1 legendary KO. And somehow, Bigfoot Silva was getting a title shot. Cain Velasquez had regained the belt by absolutely destroying Junior Dos Santos in their rematch, and now the UFC needed a new challenger. And guess what? Bigfoot was the next man up. The UFC booked Cain vs. Bigfoot 2 at UFC 160 for the heavyweight championship. Fans were divided. On one hand, Bigfoot had earned his shot, but on the other hand, did anyone really think this would end differently than the first fight? This time, Cain didn't even let the fight get bloody. He came out, threw a quick 1-2, dropped Bigfoot immediately, and finished him with hammer fists. The fight was over in 90 seconds. Bigfoot's title shot was over before it even started. He had climbed back up the ranks, but Cain was a different beast. And from this moment on, Bigfoot's career would never be the same again. If there is one fight that truly defines Bigfoot Silva's career, it is his legendary brawl with Mark Hunt. Now, if you are an MMA fan, you already know the fight was absolute carnage. First off, this fight made 0 sense on paper. Bigfoot was huge, a grappler who should have tried to take Hunt down. Hunt was a K1 Grand Prix kickboxing champion built like a fridge with one-punch knockout power. You would think that Bigfoot would fight smart, but nah. These two decided to have a slobber knocker in the center of the cage. For 2 rounds, it was heavy shots, but nothing too terribly insane. Bigfoot was doing well, landing some big kicks, using his reach, and even landing some good ground and pound. But by round 3, all hell broke loose. Bigfoot lands a huge right hand that stuns Hunt. Hunt wobbles but plants his feet and throws back instantly. Hunt fires back with a left hook that nearly caves Silva's head in. Then came the leg kicks. Bigfoot hammering Hunt's lead leg, forcing him to switch stances, but Hunt just kept marching forward. These two refused to go down. By the end of the round, both guys were already covered in blood, but it was just getting started. Bigfoot comes out swinging, and Hunt meets him in the center. Heavy shots, no defense, just 2 massive guys trading bombs. Hunt lands an uppercut that snaps Bigfoot's head back, but Silva doesn't even flinch. Instead, he fires a brutal knee that nearly folds Hunt. Somehow, neither one gets dropped. The crowd is going insane. Even Dana White is losing it at cage side. Joe Rogan is screaming. Round 5 was pure survival mode. By this point, they're barely standing. Bigfoot's face is swollen shut. Hunt is breathing through his mouth like a drowning man. They keep swinging until the final bell. The result? A majority draw. And honestly, no one cared. Because this wasn't about winning or losing. This was one of the greatest heavyweight fights of all time. And for Bigfoot, this was his last great performance. Because after this fight, everything fell apart. If Bigfoot Silva's fight with Mark Hunt was the peak of his career, then what followed was the steepest, most painful downfall MMA has ever seen. And it happened fast. We are talking one of the worst losing streaks in heavyweight history. And it wasn't just losses, it was brutal highlight reel knockouts. The kind that ages a fighter overnight. The kind that makes you question if they should even be fighting anymore. After that legendary war with Hunt, Bigfoot was still seen as a dangerous heavyweight. Sure, he didn't get the win, but his durability and heart were undeniable. And then he fought Andrei Arlovski. Now, at this point, Arlovski was in the middle of a career resurgence. He had gone from chinny and washed to suddenly looking like his old self again. But still, Bigfoot was the bigger man, the stronger guy, the one with the more recent high-level fights. It didn't matter. Arlovski lit Bigfoot up. He landed a crisp right hand that had Silva stumbling, followed it up with a perfectly timed left hook that sent Bigfoot crashing to the canvas. And just like that, Bigfoot was out cold. This was the first true warning sign. Before this, Bigfoot had lost fights, sure, but they weren't one-punch knockouts. He'd been beaten down, bloodied, overwhelmed, but his chin, it was still holding up. Now, that granite chin was starting to crack, and in the heavyweight division, once your durability goes, there is no getting it back. After the Arlovski knockout, the UFC decided to run back one of the greatest fights of all time, Bigfoot versus Mark Hunt 2. But if fans were expecting another 5-round war, they were in for a rude awakening. The fight lasted just 3 minutes. Hunt landed a right hand from hell and Bigfoot collapsed like a skyscraper in slow motion. No crazy back and forth exchanges, no blood-soaked battle. Just a single clean punch that put Bigfoot down. And suddenly it started becoming undeniable. His chin was gone. From this point on, Bigfoot's career was like watching a car crash in slow motion. Each fight, more punishment. Each loss, more brutal than the last. Like when he fought Frank Mir in 2015, Mir lands a short left hook and Bigfoot goes down immediately, KO'd in under 2 minutes. Or when he fought Stefan Struve in 2016. Struve was known for having chin issues himself, still absolutely obliterates Bigfoot in just 16 seconds. One quick combo and Bigfoot is face down on the canvas. At this point, everyone is saying the same thing. Why is he still fighting? But the thing is, when you're a fighter, especially a heavyweight, there's always one more fight. Always one more shot at proving you still belong. And unfortunately for Bigfoot, he kept taking those shots. But that wasn't the only problem Silva was facing at the time, because let's now talk about something that doesn't get enough attention when we talk about Bigfoot's decline: his medical condition. If you remember, Bigfoot has acromegaly, a rare disorder that causes excessive growth hormone production. This condition made him massive, but it also meant that he had to take specific medication to regulate it. And guess what? USADA banned that medication. So when the UFC brought in strict drug testing, Bigfoot had to stop taking the one thing that was keeping his body functioning properly. Without it, his hormones were all over the place, his energy levels dropped, and his ability to recover from damage plummeted. Basically, he wasn't the same fighter anymore. And it's not like he was ever on PEDs, he needed that medication just to live normally. But under USADA, it was considered illegal.
When you take him off of it, he had an operation on his pituitary gland. He had a tumor.
Yeah.
He had a tumor that was he was literally producing too much growth hormone. That's why you become a giant like that. So then he has this tumor removed, and now his body's not producing anything.
I know.
Right? So he has to take stuff. But they say he can't take stuff. So he's just sick all the
Remember
time.
his fighting against Mark Hunt when he was on TRT, and they just went back and forth?
Oh, that's
it was like
right.
the greatest heavyweight fight of all
and then
time.
Afterwards,
Tested
he couldn't
hot.
take a shot. Yeah.
So now you've got a guy who's already taken insane amounts of damage, lost his ability to recover from shots, and is forced off a medication that kept him healthy. And somehow he is still fighting top heavyweights. It was a recipe for disaster, and disaster is exactly what happened. Because at that point in his career, watching Bigfoot Silva fight was like watching a horror movie where you already know how it ends. Each time he stepped into the cage, it felt less like a competition and more like a public execution. And the worst part is, nobody stopped it. Not his team, not the promotion signing him, and definitely not Bigfoot himself. Now, let's be real, every fighter takes damage. You don't make a career out of throwing hands with monsters like Cain Velasquez, Mark Hunt, and Fedor Emelianenko without paying a price. But Bigfoot wasn't just taking damage. He was accumulating trauma at a level that should have forced a hard stop. Think about it. In his final UFC fights, he was getting knocked out cold in the first round. In his post-UFC career, he was getting KO'd by guys who shouldn't even be knocking people out. And in bare-knuckle boxing, he was getting hit with no gloves, making the damage even worse. We are talking about a man who suffered more knockout losses than most fighters have fights. At some point, you have to ask, how much brain trauma is too much? You would think after getting knocked out over and over again that Bigfoot would have been forced to retire, right? But here's the thing, MMA commissions don't work that way. After a brutal KO, a fighter might get a medical suspension for 30, 60, or even 90 days. But here's the kicker, that suspension only applies in the state that issued it. If a commission in Florida suspends you, you can go fight in Russia the very next month. And that is exactly what Bigfoot did. Every time a promotion stopped booking him, he'd find another one that didn't care. The UFC cut him after 5 straight KO losses. So he went to Russia. He lost again. So then he went to Brazil, lost again. So then he tried bare-knuckle boxing because clearly what a guy with 10 knockout losses and 11 fights needs is just a fight without gloves.
Did you watch Bigfoot Silva's kickboxing fight this past weekend with the KO loss? Is the CTE-induced depression in play? Dude, his story, I don't know how it's going to go. It's going to go real bad. I don't see how you can do what he's doing, which is basically slowly killing himself and destroying his brain, truly just destroying it. I mean, utterly inadvisable, traumatic contact. You know, if you're in a car accident and you get a concussion, your brain is sensitive for some time thereafter. It's easy to get a concussion if you were to be in another car accident, let's say a week later or something like that, even if it wasn't nearly as devastating a wreck. He's just doing that among all the other damage he already had. I mean, we are talking about a dire situation, if you ask me.
This wasn't sad at this point. It was downright criminal. Somebody, anybody should have stepped in and told him enough is enough. But instead, they kept booking him like he was some kind of zombie that couldn't die. Here's the thing. Nobody fights this long unless they have to. And unfortunately, most fighters do. MMA isn't like the NFL or NBA. There is no pension, no guaranteed money, no safety net. You fight because it's your job, and if the checks stop coming in, what else are you gonna do? And for Bigfoot, it was even worse. His acromegaly meant that he had extra medical costs. His fight purses weren't lasting forever, and at 40 years old with no backup plan, fighting was all that he knew. So what did he do? He kept signing contracts. He kept taking unwinnable fights, and he kept getting knocked out. And the worst part is, the people around him let it happen. Promoters, managers, commissions, nobody cared. Because as long as Bigfoot was willing to walk into the cage, there was always going to be someone willing to profit off of it. At what point do we, as fans, as fight promoters, as commissions, as a sport, at what point do we say enough? Because Bigfoot Silva's tale is a warning. A warning about what happens when fighters aren't protected from themselves, when the same toughness that made them legends becomes the thing that destroys them. And Bigfoot's story isn't even the worst one. We have seen guys like Gary Goodridge, a K1 and MMA veteran, openly talk about his struggles with CTE. We have seen fighters who can't remember their own careers, who slur their words, who struggle to live normal lives because of the damage they took for our entertainment. And yet, even after all of that, we still had to watch Bigfoot Silva go into bare-knuckle boxing, as if he hadn't already given enough of himself to this sport. This next part, it might just be the saddest chapter of all. Because at this point, you would think it was over. That someone, anyone, would have stepped in and said, "Bigfoot, you've done enough, it's time to stop." But instead he went from getting knocked out in MMA, to getting knocked out in kickboxing, to getting knocked out in bare-knuckle boxing. Because apparently, gloves were the problem. And for those who don't know, bare-knuckle boxing isn't just regular boxing without gloves. It's way worse. Without gloves, there is no padding to absorb the impact. Cuts are way more frequent, broken hands are almost guaranteed, and brain damage is exponentially higher. And this is what Bigfoot signed up for, at almost 300 pounds after a decade of brutal knockouts. Now at this stage, it wasn't even about winning anymore. It was about survival. And the result was exactly what you would expect. He got violently knocked out again. The sad part is that it wasn't even against some top-tier boxer. It was against Gabriel Gonzaga, another former MMA guy who had been through his own wars. The fight was basically two veterans who should have retired years ago getting thrown into a ring for a quick payday. And Bigfoot paid the price.
Lights out.
And then how about Gonzaga and Bigfoot Silva fought bare knuckle? That's how they're doing, sir.
know,
They found a
fuck
bare
God.
knuckle, and Gonzaga pieced Big Silva up.
Yeah,
It's hard to watch.
not good. Bigfoot Silva was a guy that when they made him get off the test, remember that?
Because let's be honest, this wasn't a competition anymore, this was exploitation. A once-feared heavyweight reduced to a name on a poster. A guy promoters threw into fights because his name still carried some recognition, even if everyone knew he was getting knocked out. And here's the thing, bare-knuckle organizations don't exactly have the same strict medical protocols as the UFC. There is less oversight, fights get sanctioned way easier, And if you're a guy like Bigfoot, who clearly shouldn't be fighting, there is always going to be a promotion willing to take the risk for the sake of selling tickets. At this point, Bigfoot was a shadow of himself. The same guy who shocked the world by beating Fedor was now getting booked in fights that nobody wanted to see. It was like watching a once great fighter slowly crumble in real time. And here is the most heartbreaking part. Even after the knockouts, even after the backlash, even after everyone begged him to stop, Bigfoot still wasn't done. Look, if you have followed this sport long enough, you know how it goes. Fighters don't retire when they should. They retire when they have no other choice. And Bigfoot, he still had a choice. If someone was willing to pay him, he would fight. If another promotion called, he would answer. If another contract was on the table, he would sign it. Because at the end of the day, fighting was all that he had left. It's easy for us fans to sit back and say, he should have stopped after the UFC. But then what? What's a guy like Bigfoot Silva supposed to do? He has spent his entire life fighting, he's not getting big analyst gigs, he's not coaching a major gym, and he is definitely not living off of UFC money because, let's be real, heavyweights in his era were not making millions. So what does he do? He fights. Again and again. Even when his body can't take it anymore, even when his mind isn't sharp anymore, even when the fans who once cheered for him beg him to stop. Because at the end of the day, he doesn't know how to do anything else. This is where we have to ask ourselves the hardest question. How do we remember Bigfoot Silva? Do we remember him as the unstoppable monster who mauled Fedor and gave us one of the greatest heavyweight wars in history? Or do we remember him as a tragic figure, a cautionary tale of what happens when the fight game chews you up and spits you out? Because the truth is, both are true. For a while, Bigfoot Silva was a force of nature. He crushed legends. He went toe-to-toe with some of the greatest heavyweights of his era. And for a brief moment, it looked like he was on his way to becoming a champion. But what happened next was the dark side of combat sports. The brutal knockouts, the medical suspensions, and the desperate attempts to keep fighting long after his body had given up. This wasn't just his fault either. Who kept letting him fight? The promoters who saw him as a recognizable name and a guaranteed highlight reel KO. The commissions who approved his fights even when it was obvious he wasn't safe to compete. The organizations that booked him, not because he could win, but because he could sell. And at some point, someone should have stepped in. But as we know, in MMA, that almost never happens. If you ever needed proof that this sport doesn't love you back, Bigfoot Silva is Exhibit A. He gave everything to fighting. His youth, his health, his brain, his future. And what did he get in return? A short moment of glory, years of brutal punishment, and a tragic exit that never should have happened. This is the side of MMA that nobody wants to talk about. The part where legends don't get happy endings. Where guys who were once feared ended up as stepping stones. Where fighters who should be retired and enjoying their lives are still taking unnecessary beatings in obscure promotions just to pay the bills. And Bigfoot isn't the only one. We have seen this story too many times. Gary Goodridge, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, Chuck Liddell, BJ Penn. Even in today's MMA, we have the perfect example of Tony Ferguson. These legends couldn't stop fighting, either because they didn't want to or because they had no other choice. So the next time you see a fighter who is clearly past their prime still taking fights, ask yourself, is this really their choice? Or is it the only thing they have left? Because the fight game is fickle. It doesn't care about what you did in your prime. It only cares about what you can do today. And when you can't fight anymore, it moves on. That is the brutal truth of MMA. And unfortunately, Bigfoot Silva learned it the hard way.